got to meet the voters where they are, and they are largely online. I mean, we're all sitting watching Stranger Things or whatever the heck rerun, and we're on this while we're doing it. And maybe
Right.
you're, that's how it works, right? We're all kind of dual screen kind of stuff. So I've got to be able to talk to people where they're comfortable in the timing. 25 years ago, I called you at dinner time, and you that was the only way I could get you to
Right.
take a poll. Now, I don't care if you're walking your dog or driving to work or it's 2:00 in the morning, you've got insomnia. There's a chance that I can get you and have you respond.
Hello, and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we have Adam Probolsky joining us from Probolsky Research. Adam, thanks for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Adam, polling has been such an interesting topic, ever since 2016. You have, Nate Silver out there, and you have all these different polls and people questioning them. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into polling and kind of what drew you to it?
Sure. I mean, I started in politics. I was a party activist as a kid, a Republican Party activist, very different to what it means today.
Right.
We've been about nonpartisan for about a decade or so, and so I'm just not involved in partisan politics like that anymore. We do a lot of work mostly for government and corporate now, but still do some political. Still do some work for legislative, and we work on both sides of the aisle, which is kind of unique, especially for California. So I've got Democratic legislative clients, I've got Republican clients, and we just work for good people. When it comes to whether they're corporate, government, political, we like to work for smart, good people. But I grew up doing everything from running campaigns as a campaign manager as a kid,
Right.
on the ground for legislature, for district attorney, for supervisor, and just built great relationships. And at some point figured out that polling was the better course than running campaigns, and just did that. Just said I was a pollster, and took a few years for people to take me seriously, but
Right.
whatever, 20, 30 years later, we're pretty good at it.
Yeah. Can you kind of talk about that process of how you got into it and kind of what you needed to do to kind of, I guess, become a credible pollster?
I needed to dissect what other people were doing and improve upon it. There's a process you go through, and I like to explain there is no secret sauce to the business of anything we do in politics or government, right? It's a very transparent process. So if from a research perspective, I think that people think there's a secret sauce, but really it's about identifying who you expect to show up and getting a real understanding of that turnout model, and then asking the questions that are going to be are going to be accurate, give you accurate results. So it's really easy to ask biased questions. And we do sometimes ask
Right.
really biased questions, because those are the questions that help you understand, what the outcome is going to be if somebody says those words or uses those words in a campaign or some kind of outreach. But really, it was just me dissecting what other people did and saying, I can do that better, and improving upon their work. And it took a long time to figure it out, years to perfect it. But like I said, decades now in, we're really good at it. But when it comes to that process, it's pretty similar for almost everybody. Figuring out the turnout model, asking the right questions, getting a reporting product that is really understandable and actionable for the client. I can spit out numbers in 10 different ways that you would make your head spin, but I've got to give a product that is going to be really useful to the user. And that sometimes is a political consultant who's running a campaign and wants to know, how do I target women over 50 who live in the second district? Or also it can be, I'm a lobbyist. How do I take these numbers and show it to legislators and have it be believable? Have them understand that we can be really effective in our outreach on this, or that there's a winning proposition. And those products look very different.
Yeah. I guess kind of more into your background, were you like a math major or into math or anything? Is there something that, in your training that kind of drew you this way? Or, I guess you started in the mid 90s. So everything had to be like pretty primitive at that point compared to now.
It was pretty primitive. So no, I'm a public policy and political guy at heart, and I guess an amateur psychologist, and really kind of understand people and emotions, because that's really what drives a lot of this. My wife was a fundraiser, a political fundraiser, and she likes to say that she was in the business of selling nothing. I mean, the idea that you would get someone to write a $5,000 check to someone running for office is insane, because you get literally nothing for it.
Right.
And so, the same thing goes to some degree for pollsters, right? I'm asking you to give me 5, 10, 20 minutes of your time. And I'm not just asking you who kind of engage in politics and public affairs. I'm asking your neighbor who is a doctor who makes $400,000 a year and just wants to chill when he's not operating. And I'm asking the plumber who works 80 hours a week and makes more than you and I, by the way, and to not chill and talk to me or complete a survey online. And so it really is a psychology game, a game of trying to get people to be participating. And there's cool things that go along with being an American, like we kind of think it's our responsibility, our civic responsibility to respond to surveys, and where we're interested in the subject matter, or we're bored, or whatever it is that gets us to respond. But it is a bit of psychology involved.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting, is kind of pinpointing what people are feeling and how they're going to act, predicting how they're going to act, and modeling it that way. And then I guess, at the end of it, you get a result. So I guess once you get your result, how often do you go back and see how accurate your prediction was?
Well, we do that every time, because that's what we do for a living. In 2020, we had a 100% accuracy rate in California for predicting outcomes.
Wow.
And that was from statewide props, down to local tax measure or mayor race. And it's not that hard to get it right. I mean, we don't think it is. On a national level, sure. If I'm polling for president, I might be a little bit more timid about showing my numbers, because it's a lot harder to do, right? It's a 50-state game. But if you are doing it right, if you're applying the practical approach to doing research, which includes today in 2022 of being multi-mode, so you got to meet the voters where they are, and they are largely online. I mean, we're all sitting watching Stranger Things or whatever the heck rerun, and we're on this while we're doing it. And maybe you're, that's how it works, right? We're all kind of dual screen kind of stuff. So I've got to be able to talk to people where they're comfortable on the timing. 25 years ago, I called you at dinner time, and you that was the only way I could get you to take the poll. Now, I don't care if you're walking your dog or driving to work or it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you've got insomnia. There's a chance that I can get you and have you respond. And that goes not just for, the 22-year-old, it goes for grandma, because it's 11 o'clock. She's on Facebook looking at whatever grandma looks at on Facebook. Here's a little beep, or Gmail goes off. She gets a link to a survey and she takes it about, whatever supervisor race. And so it's really meeting people where they are. The truth is, though, I still have to call landlines, right? About 2/3 of our survey work is online, getting people by email or text. If it's political, sometimes we even use other techniques like panels and things like that, where it can be used. But then there is social media recruiting. But then for the most part, the phone work, I do have to call some landlines, because some people are just connected by that landline phone.
Right.
You can imagine there's a few people, and then most people on their mobiles when we talk to them on the phone. And then you also have to be multilingual. If you're doing work anywhere in this country, you have to have Spanish as a component. And it really increases your accuracy rate, because even if it's only 2 or 3%, in California it's about 10%, are preferring to speak Spanish. It's not this sort of it's not that those 10% don't speak English. Most Americans speak English. Most voters speak English. But if they have a preference for Spanish, and you start to talk to them in English, they may just not participate, and you lose that accuracy element.
Right.
So you got to be multi-mode, and you got to be multilingual, and just kind of meet people where they're comfortable.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I had some experience with some polling a couple of years ago, and it was a purely online poll, and it was kind of dismissed by the accepted folks as garbage because it was purely online. Can
Yeah.
you kind of talk about that technology and polling and how it's kind of making it more accurate and helping kind of produce better numbers?
I will tell you, there are consultants in California that will only use online polling. And I have great respect for them. It's on a statewide basis. Online only polling is just as accurate as multi-mode, telephone and online. It's because it's such a big pool of people, and you can match the demographics of your turnout model. That's really what it comes down to. I really don't care necessarily entirely about the mode. If you're giving me the right number of men and women, the right number of Republicans and Democrats and NPP voters, the right number of people on a regional basis, as long as in age groups, as long as you're giving me those proportions properly, or we're delivering it, I care less about the mode. Now, realistically, that's hard to do on, let's say, in the city of Fresno, maybe, because the pool is so small, is smaller. And so it's harder to replicate that perfect model with just online. And that's why you might want to do phones. It can be done, but it's just a little harder. On a statewide basis, you can get that. And especially if you're testing propositions where now we have the ballot label, we're this close to the election. But pre-ballot label, when you're constructing this paragraph long explanation of what the ballot looks like, I understand why some consultants only want to do online, because how effective is it for me to read to you, or my interviews to read to you, sentences upon sentences upon sentences, and have you give me feedback on it? It's a lot more effective for you to read it just like you're going to read it at your kitchen table when you're filling out your ballot, or in the ballot booth.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've gotten the phone polling, I've seen the online polling, and now in the last couple of months, I've been starting getting text polling.
Right.
Is that something that's kind of trending now? That you're seeing as a reliable tool as well?
Yeah, it's super helpful. So the multi-mode component includes me sending you a text message and onboarding you to the online survey, or sending you an email. That's largely how we do it. And like I said, there's other techniques, including using social media ads and using panel respondents that we don't tend to use so much in politics, because it's harder for me to identify the individual and get the numbers accurate, because you're self-reporting versus using the voter file in a poll that we typically do. But yeah, it's super effective. Again, we're meeting you where you are. I mean, you probably don't realize it, but you probably send like 40 texts in a day, and so to 40 different people, and so you're very much living in that messaging app, and so it's a very natural place for me to reach you. And the same thing goes for email, obviously, more and more, hopefully less so, but you're living in that environment, so it's very normal to be reached there and be comfortable responding to something from there.
Yeah, we're coming up to election season, which means we're starting to get kind of drilled in the head with all sorts of commercials on propositions and different things coming up on the ballot. What are you seeing right now in terms of trends of the propositions, and how do you expect that to change from now until November, when these ads start trickling in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, ads for gaming have been on for permanently. We were seeing them in early in the year, kind of a thing. It was crazy, and so that is obviously just going to be stepped up. We haven't yet been barraged with kidney dialysis ads, which I'm sure are coming, which even for those of us who are fully engaged in politics and public policy, probably still don't understand that ballot measure that's coming back. And then there's some others that just don't need to advertise, right? The tax on what was it? 30. Basically taxing millionaires for wildfire and reducing air pollution, whatever it delivers, vehicle charging stations. They don't really have to advertise, because most, every single voter does not make $2 million a year. So, it's kind of a no-brainer for a lot of people to vote on it. Now, I mean, I think there are significant ramifications to something like that, because when you are a higher earner, you're much more likely to have a place in time where you hit where it's like, okay, it's now worth it for me to leave the state.
Right.
It's now worth it for me to spend half my time in Texas or Tennessee or Florida. And so I think we're getting to that point where we kind of, every time you pass one of those taxes, you bring in a whole other element of a voter, another 10,000 people that say, screw it, I'm out of here. But the truth is, we'll probably pass that one.
Right. Kind of the current thought is that if for a proposition to pass, it has to start high. It has to start in the high 50s or 60s, and then it slowly gets brought down closer to election day. Is that something that you see hold true year after year?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it's where you want to start, right? It's more of a function of, it should start high, right, in the high 50s, 60s or more, right. Because that's where I want it to be if I'm the proponent. It's a psychological place to start from. And the real impact is the dollars spent. So, I mean, a tax, let's say like, Prop 30 on millionaires, I assume, I haven't polled on that, but I assume it's probably in the high 50s and it will pass with limited spend. But the truth is, it's in the other ones that are competitive, where you're going to have yes and no proponents. It's really about the spending. It's about how much money is going to be spent on each side, and to some degree the efficacy of that spending. But we've got a whole pool of really smart consultants in this state that do really good work. Rarely on a statewide basis do you see like something and shake your head and say, "Wow, that's crap." Right. So really, it's about the spending, and are they actually going to invest in spending, or do they have numbers that say they can't get from here to there? That's the other real component. Like, I think it's easy to look at pollsters and say, oh, they just like tell us what's happening. And the truth is, if I do a 60-question survey, like we're doing on, let's say, some tax measures on a local basis in California, 50 of those questions are focused in on messaging, right? What are the components of this campaign is going to make people be more supportive or less supportive? And I'll tell you right now, in almost every case, I can flip people in the confines of the kind of campaign in a vacuum that happens inside of a poll. And I can move people. And it's just a matter of, does the client want to spend the 25,000 or 250,000 or 25 million it's going to take to make that difference, depending on the community you're working in. So that's the biggest part of what we do as pollsters, is test messages to see which ones have import and which ones are going to move people to the right side.
Yeah, and I think the one that speaks to that probably the most was Prop 22 2 years ago, where I remember when it first came out, right before election season, it was polling in the mid 30s, right. And they were able just to message it out of the park until it passed. Is that something that you saw? You saw the messaging resonating? Do you recall kind of looking at polling for Prop 22?
Yeah, and I have I Prop 22 is kind of one that I have personal feelings about, right? As a pollster, I'm supposed to kind of take 3 steps back and not really bring my emotions and personal feelings into things. But that one was like, I was tracking it because it was so absurd. Right. We live in 2022. Everybody has the chance to do something gig. The notion of employment is kind of silliness to me, depending on where you are in life. And so, but yeah, there was effective campaigning going on for sure.
Yeah,
very effective.
And people keep pointing to Prop 22 kind of to this year's ballot measure, 26 and 27 dealing with sports betting, where we're seeing that kind of talk about that same kind of dollar spend being mounted. The tech company spent $200 million, but they only had 17 million on opposition. Here we have, this clash of the titans where you have hundreds of millions on both sides. Right. Kind of what are you seeing on 26 and 27? And kind of what do you expect with all the ad spending to kind of see, do you expect things to change much from today to November?
I don't know how much ad spending is really going to happen. We haven't seen the yes side, or at least I haven't seen the yes side show up in dramatic form. And it may be because, on either, because I think they're both underwater. So we're showing, Prop 26 underwater marginally. It's very mixed. It's definitely not in the 50s and 60s where, kind of people emotionally think it should start.
Right.
If you're a proponent. And then 27 is on the no side in majority format, 52% saying they're voting no. So I think they're both failing unless there is the $100 million ad campaign, because there's $100 million on the other side. So I don't think either one of them sees success unless we see big spending. And this is polling is a snapshot in time, but is very predictive of outcomes if the current construct stays the same. So if you don't start to see big yes money, they're both going down.
Right. Kind of, how often do you should an entity poll to see when public mood changes? Is this something that should happen weekly, monthly, quarterly? Kind of how long does it take for, the public mood to change on an issue?
Well, you're asking the pollster, should you poll more often? And I'm going to say yes. Look, big campaigns like Prop 26, 27 are oftentimes doing nightly tracks, and probably not for the next 90 days, but you're doing, in the last several weeks, you're probably doing nightly tracks. You're probably doing at least weekly tracks, especially maybe even in focus markets, right? Where let's say you turn on, $1 million worth of cable buy in the LA market, you're going to track that for a couple of weeks and see what happens after that $1 million buy. So it really depends on the type of campaign. I think ideally, if you really have a vested interest in the outcome, and this goes for statewide, but also a lot of local measures that that affect billionaires and residents and all kinds of different people in between. So typically, you're going to track at some sort of interval where campaigning is happening. So oftentimes you see campaigns track before filing to kind of help them with their arguments and make sure they're getting things right when it comes to the pre-messaging. Then they poll just after filing when they know exactly what everything looks like, what the label looks like on the ballot. And then they have some interval, and it could be weekly if you're spending $100 million. It could be, monthly if you're spending $10 million, and it might be, quarterly or, a couple times, maybe small tracks if you're spending, $1 million. But even if you're spending $250,000, $250,000, you could do tracking polls especially on a local basis, could be, less than $10,000. It can be just a quick hit. Are we winning? Are we losing? And find out a little bit of the why in that process also.
Right. As you said, as a pollster, you kind of track public mood, kind of as you're talking to people in these last 30 days, kind of what's front of mind and kind of what are their thoughts on, the economy and government in general?
Homelessness. It is like off the charts in some communities. Californians, and I explain it this way. I think we're generally good people in California. I think, I like where I live. I appreciate the community. I appreciate all kinds of things we have in California. And I think we're good people, but we are not sympathetic on homelessness. Californians basically are telling their politicians, get them the hell out of my sight in almost every place we poll. And it's not that they don't have sympathy. It's just get them out of my sight. And they're willing to pay for it. They're willing to support programs. Just leave is what they want. And so if you have a solution for homelessness, you're going to have a lot of support coming your way, and it's going to be a tough road to overcome if you've got some solution and somebody's trying to say that's not really the right solution. Except where money's just been thrown at it and there's been no fixes. And I think that's where a lot of people think is the case. So homelessness, as we're seeing we do work for a lot of public agencies, and in almost every public agency we're working in, homelessness is number one. Also high on the list, housing affordability. And it's easy for us in politics, especially in public policy, to look at housing affordability from a traditional affordable housing model, public-private partnership, nonprofit build some sort of nonprofit, based housing that is, not market rate. But that's not what the public is looking for. There's a clamoring for, I call it in Southern California, the let them live in Victorville syndrome of I don't want any more housing here,
Right.
so let them go to Victorville, or in the Bay Area, it could be let them live in Stockton, right? It's this essentially, people don't want more. If I've got mine, I don't want anybody else to build anything. But there's a big clamoring from all classes of people, age groups, and where's my kid going to live? Where am I going to live? They want a place where they can afford. And, it's scary for a lot of people. We have an amazing tool in California called Prop 13, which allows seniors to stay in their homes versus what a lot of people in places like New York and New Jersey don't have that advantage. They literally have to move to Florida or somewhere, South Carolina or Georgia, because their taxes are just too damn high.
Right.
And they have to leave. California, we don't have that, except we have this kind of housing affordability crisis that is really forcing people to have to leave.
That's interesting. You also kind of see public mood. You always, pollsters usually ask, like, do you have a favorable thinking of how things are going? Do you think the state's going in the right direction or wrong direction? Is that something you're tracking right now, or that you've seen? And I guess, how does it rank today? How are people's kind of mood compared to what you've seen in the past, 10, 20 years?
It's bad. There's a couple of things they're a little bit conflicting. So starting about 6 years ago, we saw this precipitous drop in trust in government and trust in institutions. And that was, pretty clear to see. That came back over the last couple of years a bit. So there was greater trust in government institutions, not a lot, but a little bit more than it was. Because used to be local government had really high ratings and versus the legislature, right, or versus Congress. But that really kind of got decimated over those 6 years. Come back a little bit. But right now, we have real things like inflation and higher gas prices and housing costs, things like that are affecting people. But there's this really significant media narrative that everything's gone to shit. And so, when you have that constant drone of narrative that things are really bad, that hurts things. And in addition to the fact that there's real pain involved too, depending on your economic status. And so most places we're polling in, the state, of course, is upside down, wrong track. And almost every political subdivision in the state, if you ask the question, they'll say we're on the wrong track in, Yolo County to San Diego County. We're going in the wrong direction. So that's a definite factor. And what does that tell you? Here's the pearl of wisdom is you get to run against the establishment. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're trying to accomplish, if you're trying to, be the establishment or be City Hall or be, the guys running the show or women running the show, you're going to have a harder time because people are saying whatever's happening now isn't going well in a lot of places.
Right. It's kind of an interesting year. We've had redistricting, we've having 30 some new odd legislators coming in. You got some very competitive congressional races out there. Not that you maybe have all these top of mind, but what are some of the most competitively held districts you're seeing out there that you think are going to be some real competitive close races out there this year?
I think well let's start out by the big picture, right? Starting maybe a year or so ago, there was kind of the general conversation we hear every year about midterms, presidential, the party in power loses numbers. And so that was the narrative for the first, few months of the year, or even before that. And then Afghanistan pullout and a lot of fumbles by Biden and a lot of scenarios that, there's not a lot of love for Biden. There's no love for Pelosi, right? Not that they're bad people, but they get things done, but not a lot of love for them. So there was this general idea that Democrats were going to lose seats, and even in a place like California. And then I think that's shifted a little bit, right? Just in the last few weeks, I think we've seen a shift a bit in a possibility of Democrats not losing as much as they were going to lose. I'll tell you one, seat that's in my backyard. Actually, I think is literally this district. You've got Katie Porter, who's the Democratic incumbent, versus Scott Baugh, who's a former Republican leader in the state assembly and a former county party chair. I think that's going to be a fairly competitive race, not just because of party politics, but because Katie Porter is so different, so out of touch from a political standpoint. She's very in touch with the world, but from a political standpoint, she does not match the politics of her district. And I think any elected that's kind of in that scenario, that could really be a factor for them. And she's a clear example that her politics are much more progressive than her constituents are. So I think you can start to look and see, if you see that somewhere, there's a possibility for a Republican being successful. But I don't see a lot of Republican pickups regardless. It's California.
Right. It's interesting. I was thinking, you've been doing this for 20, 25 years, 30 years. What are some of the biggest election day surprises that you can remember where, you've had a poll, you thought you had it figured out, and then you get an opposite result the next morning?
Well, I'm not like pretending I'm the best poll for the world. Right? Nostradamus, I think we're pretty good. We don't get polling wrong. Now, I've definitely been surprised by races, but we don't get polling wrong just because we're on top of it and we know how to do it and we're accurate. So I don't ever get surprised by that sort of thing. I'm surprised in places where I'm not polling and I feel like, usually I emotionally want someone to win, or I want a measure to win, and I'm let down in that way. But as far as accuracy goes, it doesn't happen to us generally.
But I guess the letdown is gentle for you because you already know it's going to happen, right?
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And
see it happening.
Yeah, we generally do, but there are moments where it's kind of like, well, that kind of sucks,
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess you weren't surprised when Trump won in 2016.
No, I probably was. I mean, I'm like, I was, when it comes to national politics like that, I'm kind of an observer like anybody else. But I did have to deconstruct it afterwards to kind of really understand where that comes from. And because I think we had some sense of, we can put Trump aside a little bit, but really some sense that we were kind of tamping down, kind of generationally evolving beyond, hardcore racism and white nationalism, things like that. We were kind of moving beyond it. And what we found over the last, 6 years or so, that no, it turns out it's very present and very here, and he obviously empowered or made those people feel more comfortable in their roles in being racist and hate and negative. And so that was kind of really surprising. That's part of the deconstruction. But that's not obviously all of Americans that support him. There's a whole other element of, you've got to, I live in Southern California. I live in Irvine, the most perfect place in the world as far as I'm concerned. So having, some moderate success in life, it's very easy to kind of forget where everyone else is in their position in life. And if you can go put yourself into the position of the Kansas factory worker who was making $27 an hour at some point and then lost their job because the factory closed, and while Trump was running the first time, was making $15 an hour or even less in some other role, that's a remarkable shift in their life. And to a lot of us, that we can't quite compute those numbers because it's just not really where we are. We kind of have different places we make more money, right? But if you understand that person's role, they save up for once every couple of years to drive, not fly, to drive to Disney World for 4 days. They're used to getting a new truck, pickup truck every 8 years. Now they got to make that truck last another 5 or 6. and they had a chance of sending their kid to college, but maybe they feel like they can't send their kids to college now. That was the environment that created Trump, was people feeling very disaffected. And so, yeah, as a pollster, it's my job to kind of like say, okay, Adam, you got to get out of your Southern California house that has some, stupid amount of appreciation in the last 10 years, and realize, there's, people that bought their house for $125,000 and it's worth $135,000 now, right? Not, bought their house for, 1.5 and it's worth 5 million now. So, we gotta remember there's different people in this world.
Yeah, I guess 2016, it seems like it was the beginning of kind of tearing down science and institutions of knowledge and things like that. I guess it started with polling. People were like, well, polling doesn't work anymore. Right. Look at this. And then, it slowly led to, well, vaccines don't work. Doctors don't know what they're talking about. And it keeps kind of trending that way. Kind of, how have you been able to deal with kind of this questioning of polling and whether it's accurate and whether it's nonsense, and kind of reestablish that it does work, it is, a scientific method, and here's why?
So, I mean, there is a fear that on a big, broad basis, people don't believe in it, and maybe they'll participate less. But the truth is, any consultant, any political consultant, any lobbyist, any deal-making lawyer in California anyway, or anywhere else in the country, any local elected official or city manager, or any of the people that run state agencies, they know that polling works, because they can see it, right? You can show them the numbers and you can show them the outcomes, and so they generally believe in it. I don't have to sell clients, the people, the buyers of research, on the value of research. It's because we can show them the accurate numbers. Here's what we polled, here's what the outcome, and also you can show movement over time. And here's the message you're supposed to use. The ad agency develops the great ad, and then we can show movement over time and things like that, and adoption of things like adoption of website use, or adoption of program signups, or whatever it is. So that I'm not so worried about. There is that broader public perception that somehow that it's trickery, or it doesn't really work, and that is just generally concern, and it just probably takes 1 or 2 elections for pollsters to get it right in some key races for people to have a little better confidence in it, and I think generally we'll see that. The media has a desire to create environments where there's competition, so you keep want to watch it. But like Liz Cheney is not winning tonight in Wyoming, so let's not pretend she's winning for re-election when every poll says she's going to lose. So I think the same thing goes for some other congressional or Senate races or something like that, where you pretty much know what's going to happen. Polls get it right, and I think people get more confidence.
Yeah, and they just don't like the results.
Right.
Yeah, right. People want Liz Cheney to win. They're
I don't care how partisan you are on either side. She's a good actor in this process. You may not agree with her policies, but she's a good actor in this political process. Maybe one of the few last ones we've got.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned you did a lot of work for local governments. How can local governments use your service to kind of the betterment of their constituents and kind of achieve the goals they want?
So a lot of the time we are in the business of, government has adopted a lot of the same kind of, or they've adopted some of the same practices as corporate world. So kind of identifying best practices and meeting customer service and using metrics to drive how they operate. So not the politics side of things, but okay, we've got good parks. How do we make them better? We've got roads that need improvements. Where do we allocate our resources to make people happier? And do we consistently improve our numbers when it comes to satisfaction? It oftentimes, when you get more into the kind of policy side and political side, is we have got such a limited amount of discretionary resources. You're a medium-sized city and you've got a budget of $100 million. You might only have $5 or $10 million at most that's discretionary. Everything else is allocated towards roads and cops and firefighters. And then there's this little pool of money you can play with to get it right. And we come in to help them prioritize that, to make them understand this is what the constituency really cares about and what they want to see happen. And then at the same time, there are definitely, there'll be, I think there might be 100. I mean, there's a ton of tax measures on a local level throughout the state. Sales tax, property tax, real estate transfer tax. I mean, we're California. We know how to tax everything. So there's a ton of those, bond measures, things like that. So they're on the ballot. So we are involved in the process of helping them understand what's going to happen, identify the things, the components of what you can do with those tax monies, new revenues, and accomplish what the voters are looking for. Also identify the things that are scariest, right? What if we don't have these resources? What the agency can't do, or what they'll have to cut? There's a real clear dividing line. Obviously, public agencies are never in the business of advocating for taxes or advocating for ballot measures, right, but they can and do reach out to their constituency and say, hey, if this tax passes, here's the puppies and rainbows that we can all have. And if it fails, here's these really dark, desolate times we might have to live in. And I'm being dramatic, but that's the reality of what they tend to do, is kind of talk about the great and the good and bad and ugly of what might happen. And our process helps them understand those things in that outreach.
Here we are, we're coming into the final weeks of the legislative session. People are trying to, pass or prevent their policy of choice from passing. How can polling help legislative advocates get their point across and help them pass or prevent passage of certain measures?
So we do a lot of that. First and foremost, I always tell clients, polling is internal, right? This is for your group, your core group of 2 people or 10 people. This is who we should brief, who we should talk about the results. And then once you know it, you digest it, you understand it. The next step is, okay, how do we use this to our advantage? And sometimes you release some of those or all of those numbers to the press, and you get a news article because it's that interesting, right? We're trying to build this, big desal plant or treatment plant, or trying to build 10,000 new homes. And, there's a lot of questions about it. Well, you tell the press that there's big support in the community for it. Great. On a statewide basis or a legislative basis, if you identify big support for it, and there's kind of a tentative nature of support in the legislature, you're going to show up with a 1-page memo or the full poll. I'm going to show up and brief that legislator or those legislators on the results. And what's nice is most legislators got there either through the help of a strategist, including a pollster on the team, because they're spending real money. So they understand and respect research. And they have some ability to read it and can kind of understand whether it's valuable or not. And then a lot of them came from local government, so their local agencies did polling. So it's nice that most legislators have a healthy respect for statistically valid research. So when I show up, or when a lobbyist shows up and gives them that memo, they're going to take it to heart. It's not going to necessarily sway them, right? If they're opposed to a policy measure, they're not necessarily just going to all of a sudden, the voters think this, I'm going to run that direction. But it's a part of that advocacy process. You in bigger advocacy projects, right? You're doing TV, you're doing direct mail, you're doing radio ads and newspaper ads. On smaller ones, you're just kind of maybe getting doing grass tops kind of work, getting those 5 phone calls from their friends and donors, the things that you know how to do. But somewhere in that process is research, and there's cool examples. I've got one I can talk about publicly, or a bunch I can talk about publicly, but one is kind of cool. Social Compassion is a nonprofit that does lobbying, that gets animal rights legislation and protects animals and things like that. And so there's been half a dozen times where we've done polling for them, where they've used that in the legislative process of advocacy, and they've been successful. I don't take full credit for it, but it's definitely a part of that process where you show what people think. And you can kind of, especially if it's something that your legislator isn't really caring so much about, you show them 70-80% of the public says, yeah, we shouldn't anally electrocute minks to kill them for
Right.
for food, for coats. So yeah, okay, yes, I'm with you.
Right. One cool thing I think you do is you do add-on questions to your polls. You're going out and you kind of email everyone saying, hey, anybody else have something to want to add on? Because one of the, I guess, barriers to entry into polling is it can be really expensive if you want to do one issue. Can you kind of talk about your add-on polling and kind of how you've made polling accessible to maybe folks who don't have millions of dollars or six figures to do it?
You almost make it like I'm doing a public service, which sounds wonderful. I feel so good about myself now. So look, it's actually fun for us. So let's say we have a client comes to us and say we've got a few questions, or we have a poll and we don't care if you add on to it. And so we'll just send an email out to our closest 5,000 friends in California and say, hey, we're doing a poll. You can buy on. It's not cheap to buy on necessarily, but for a few $1,000s, you get a poll question versus having to spend 20 or 30 or 60 or 100 grand on your own poll. So yeah, it's kind of cool. And we almost always get a dozen people to say, yeah, I want to test this idea. Usually it's for a legislative advocacy, or maybe it's a campaign that they are going to do like next year, and they just want to test the idea early on. Or a lot of the time we have a lot of we have a lot of environmental justice clients, and they'll kind of pre-test legislative ideas that they want to throw up at the legislature. And so it's kind of cool to be able to offer that. And yes, it's a great opportunity. You get to ask that one burning question or five without spending the big budget. And it is beneficial, especially for smaller nonprofits or smaller advocacy groups that don't have big budgets. We tend to really be a big resource to them.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Adam. Thanks for kind of taking some time and talking to us about polling. Definitely fascinating. If some of our listeners want to check you out and kind of your company and what you're up to, what's the best way to find you?
Probolskyresearch.com, but I mean, I'm very accessible. You can find my cell phone number and email, and
Are you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter, Adam Probolsky, at Adam Probolsky. You can tweet at me, you can Facebook at me, you can do whatever you want. Nothing hasn't already been said, so you can also hate on me when it's all you want.
And for anyone who's not on the 5,000 person email list to get the add-on questions, I highly recommend you email Adam and ask to be added to the list. It's a great service, and thank you for providing that.
Of course, thank you.
And here's to you continuing your 100% effectiveness coming into the election season.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. We're working hard on it.
You got to add a money back guarantee. That
right. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen.
Oh man, awesome. Well, thank you, Adam. Great talking with you, and look forward to seeing how the results come in this November and checking in with you later.
Look forward to it. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks.